Welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Sarah Custer, Editor-in-Chief at Inside Higher Ed.
We are super excited to welcome you. Each week we team up and have a conversation with a leader in the field that we think you should be listening to. And we're trying to have a conversation about leadership and kind of the complexity and uniqueness of these roles and what it takes to do them and do them well in a moment when it's very strange in the world. So we try and keep it super positive, and that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And this show is also sponsored by Mainstay. Conversations with higher ed leaders on weekly wisdom frequently emphasize the role of innovation in student engagement. Mainstay aligns with this vision by equipping institutions with AI-driven communication platforms that facilitate timely interventions and support driving academic success. Learn more at mainstay.com.
And we are also, this is rebroadcast on the Innovating Together podcast, which is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And we're always very grateful for their support. And now, drum roll, we're bringing on, bringing the heat. Rob Anderson, super excited to have you here. We're excited to welcome you. You and I known each other for a bit through random circumstances that we one time were giving a speech on stage at similar times. But for folks at home who don't know, Rob Anderson is someone who is a serious force in the field, who's providing leadership, especially if you're in a state with a university system. He's playing a really critical role to ensure that your university system leaders are connected and know what the best ideas are and what the right things to be doing and are actually operating kind of like a national community of practice. So that's SHEEO for folks who don't know. And he's the president of SHEEO, but prior to that, he was also kind of a big deal as the vice chancellor at the University System of Georgia and the executive vice chancellor for administration at the West Virginia Higher Ed Policy Commission. So the world of policy, governance, hashtag fix higher ed. That's where Rob Anderson comes to the table. Thanks so much for being here, Rob.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we first met when we were both at, I think it was a SHEEO conference 100 years ago. And you and your wife, who both worked together, were giving an Ignite talk. And I was giving a talk from my prior job when I was chief of staff for university system. And then since then, you've obviously had a wide range of careers. So how the heck did this happen? Tell us, how did you end up in this work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bridget. And, what I do now, I had no idea this was a job when I was coming along, and probably all the way through undergraduate. And it wasn't into grad school when I started to take state policy classes that I really started to see that the state administrative role was a thing out there. But I worked at a campus for a number of years first, and I also have a seminary degree. And so leveraging that, I worked at a small Presbyterian college in Western North Carolina called Montreat College for 7 years. And then I ended up going back to grad school to get a terminal degree. And that's where I kind of focused in on the state policy space.
Seminary. Did not pick that up in my Wikipedia search. That is fascinating. I'm sure that you drop on that work daily as state policy continues to be more complex.
Absolutely.
There are actually quite a few. It's obviously just coincidence, but I have come across several higher education leaders who have ministerial backgrounds. And I could maybe see some overlaps. I'm sure, Rob, you could say a bit more on that, but I guess similar kind of callings and purpose-filled work that maybe brings you here. But maybe you can get into that a little bit, because my next question is, who or what has most shaped the way that you lead?
Yeah, and I would say that's through a set of experiences. So some of my colleagues, and I have these conversations with them, and I'm in awe of them, who have it all strategically kind of planned out. I'm going to do this, and then I hope that leads to this, and then to this. And I've kind of gone more to positions that kind of bring me joy or I find interesting, and I just kind of see where it's going to take me, and it's kind of led to this to a certain degree. When I was an undergraduate, it gets even weird. I was an undergraduate at a military college, so another unusual experience. And I was going to go to law school and was literally driving to take the LSATs from Charleston to Columbia, South Carolina, and turned the car around. It just didn't feel right. And I was scared once I did that, all the next steps were going to fall into place. And I was going to end up 10 years down the road, not very happy doing what I was preparing to do. And so that really led to a reset. And I ended up going to spend that summer after I graduated from college down in El Salvador. I had been there once before. My dad's a dentist, and he had done medical missions with a Franciscan priest. This was in the late 80s. They still had a civil war going. And so I had that experience and found it very rewarding, and went to spend the summer with this priest and a dorm dad in an orphanage he had for males who had lost their parents during the war. And so with that, went and had that experience, learned more from them, more than I could ever impart to them. It was just a very humbling thing. And that's kind of shaped me in all of my time, as far as my outlook in life, the view and perspective I try to take. And it led me to seminary with the thought of perhaps being a missionary and being in service of others overseas. But along that path, I enjoyed the academic pursuit a bit more than I thought I might. And it ended up heading into that direction. And that's when I worked for Montreat College, and from there kind of pivoted in the state policy space.
I mean, again, way more questions are being triggered by your answer. I'm like, the military, to save the world. This is so interesting. I love finding out that people have so much more behind them in terms of the complexity by which you look at the world. And yeah, that's super interesting. I want to add one piece, which is in your undergraduate career, because I'm trying to always surface, like, what are the experiences that you had inside or outside the classroom, or associated in any way, that most prepared you and set you up for success at work or in your career?
Yeah, I would say one of each kind of comes to mind. As far as inside the classroom, when I was in high school, I had a fairly robust preparation there. I started out as a business major in college. It just seemed to make practical sense, the thought of maybe going to law school, but who knows what might come down the pike. And so starting there, of course, I'm taking English 101 that first semester. And this was back in the 80s. And the 5-paragraph essay was a pretty big thing. And so we had our first one in class. I had done that a lot through high school, and so was fairly prepared. And we went in to meet with our professor individually. And he told me, he said, in reading this, I think you might make a pretty good English major. I think that could be a good path for you, and you'd have a lot to learn and to contribute. And that struck me in a number of ways. First, I was being viewed as a person, and someone was thinking about the possibilities within me instead of just judging my performance and giving me a letter grade and sending me on my way. So I think that was a very important moment in my life, to realize these professors actually saw me as an individual. And it really changed the way I viewed my next 3.5 years in this undergraduate experience. And I did change to be an English major, and I got to know a lot of my professors quite well. And without that experience, I don't know that would have taken place. And secondly, in being at a military college, you're often put into situations that are somewhat no-win. You just, one answer you give a lot at a military college is sir, no excuse, sir. And life is like that in a lot of ways. And you just have to persevere. There's no easy answer. There's no clear pathway. And you have to just kind of forge forward and not let it paralyze you or get you angry or get you down. And so I learned that at an early age there. And I think that's really helped me as I've gone through particularly a variety of states and state political environments.
Yeah. I'm sure sir, no, sir has probably echoed through the back of your mind in many state and political environments.
Absolutely.
That's so great that you had that mentorship in your undergraduate education. I think that we still know today that that relationship between faculty and students is so important to how they feel about their learning experience and how they progress and stay in college. I'm curious to know if what's been the most unexpected lesson or pivot for you in your leadership journey?
I would say, when I worked on a college campus at Mont Street College, I love the experience. I started going in to be a resident director and heading up student activities. And I stayed there over 7 years. And being a small private college, you wore a lot of hats. And I created some new hats to wear, including heading up a retention council that I started to help with particularly first generation students and those who were on the cusp of falling behind academically. We started a first year experience and retention program, largely based on what John Gardner was doing at the time at the University of South Carolina. And I even had him come in and speak to our faculty, which was a very rewarding experience in the midst of all that. Even started a tennis program there. I played tennis in college. And so started a program and was the first coach there. So was feeling really good about that, where I was and what I created. But at the same time, this was a college having a lot of enrollment difficulties at the point, and there were going to have to be cuts. And although what I was doing was important, it wasn't front and center. And I received notice that after the next year's contract, I was going to be leaving the college. And that really hit me straight on, and some immediate surprise and anger. But what it helped me really realize is not to take things personally. When I stood back from this situation, it wasn't about me. It was about a broader context. And then as I've gone into more of a state political environment, what I learned here served me well in Tennessee and West Virginia and Georgia, and what I do now. You're going to have a lot thrown at you. And you're going to feel like you're being targeted sometimes, but that's generally not the case. You're generally being spoken at or through in some ways to deliver a much broader message. Yeah. And it's up to you to realize what is being said. You have to listen and react in an understanding way versus just to respond or just to prove your point. And I think coming out and learning not to take things personally early on in my career, I think has really served me well in that regard.
That's good. Well, given that you've opened the door, can I ask you a question? I don't think you're probably expecting. I just want to talk about the headspace of a SHEEO, because you and I both have worked around in the system world, and you understand how different they have to think compared to the person on the campus. And given that right now things are really difficult across higher ed, like especially research universities, I think it's the worst. But I find that we don't always enroll possible allies because we don't understand how much we have in common. And I just think there is still a gap between, presidents and universities and those at the institution, and the understanding of kind of how the headspace of the SHEEO needs to clock for different things and to think and to navigate different things. Can you give us a window to help with some more empathy of what's the headspace of a SHEEO and what would be helpful for people to understand so that they could work better with them?
No, I appreciate that question, and you're spot on. It's a different space to serve in, and what I often describe it to, it's like being the conductor of an orchestra where you have great musicians and they're finely trained and their instruments are well tuned. But when you're thinking about state leadership versus campus leadership versus faculty, sometimes they're playing different tunes. And the SHEEO director has to sometimes try to be a conductor who brings all of that music together for the betterment of the state, because there's a lot of translation taking place from those elected officials to those who are serving in campuses. And each entity knows that they have a role to play and rightfully holds onto those responsibilities closely. And I think we really are kind of at an inflection point to where better, greater understanding is needed, and I think it will serve us well moving forward in this time. Our membership at SHEEO includes all 50 states, so that's a whole lot of different political contexts and types of demands. Yet when our leaders come together and have conversations, they really, how they go about it might be different, but they really are able to focus on students and the outcomes that they will receive that'll help ultimately their state economies and serve their states better as well. So these individuals are generally very unflappable people. They're put in a situation to where probably the answer is not going to be perfect for any party involved, but they're trying to reach the best solution. And I think we're at a point right now where campus leaders and faculty can really work closely with their state leadership within their capital cities to better understand each other and to look for solutions based on what strengths each brings to the table, as well as allies and forms of communication that they might possess. And so I think this ability to really listen to each other and understand where they're coming from could be a really powerful thing that this point in time is giving us.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Everybody coming to the table with open minds and everybody willing to listen to each other. Rob, can you do a little bit of myth busting for us and tell us maybe what people get wrong when they think about university systems?
I think a lot of times that folks don't realize that they really do put a lot of thought into the campus context and to what some of these outcomes are going to be regarding policies that are passed, whatever dictate comes from above and is going to be enacted on a campus. There's a lot that's gone into it by the time it results in policy. For instance, when I was at the University System of Georgia, we took a close look at developing out a co-requisite remediation type of program, which is more of a credit-bearing model. And so we started with 5 campuses who wanted to enter the space, and we saw that the results were very robust about those who were getting through this first credit-bearing English or math course and then able to proceed in a successful manner. And so using that, we then expanded to the whole system writ large. But if that hadn't been the findings, if it had been a bust, we weren't going to proceed just because we as an entity thought it was the best path forward. And I think these leaders really do struggle to balance in the best way that they can, both state expectations and the real world of the campus. Yeah. And I think further conversation will just strengthen those relationships. But this is something that not a day would go by in any of the states I served in that we didn't try to discern how this would impact our colleagues who were serving their students on campus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always found that often when I go in, folks, the way that people talk about the system is kind of like they're like controlling, or they're kind of like the cops, and it's a I guess it might show up that way because they're the ones who have to hold institutions accountable for many of the things the legislature and the governor have funded. But I always I took on government relations at the system level as one of my last seems like a fun new skill. And I just don't think that people ever really understood that we were on their side, that we were like kind of taking the hits for them in the halls so that they could actually be back on campus. I don't think that the way that systems are trying to reduce the amount of distraction that the campuses could be subjected to. I think that piece, it's not like I'm saying we need to get credit, or they need to get credit for it, but I'm like, I just don't I think there's like a same team energy that I think would, if they could understand just how many bad bills SHEEOs stop and how much bad overreach from other spaces they prevent, that you will never know was possible. Because all we're going to do is spend our time arguing about this one thing that I actually have to hold you accountable on, So it's like, yeah, I get that. It's unfortunate. Well, I feel like hopefully some folks, I still think there's always going to be some misunderstanding between the two. But I did want to ask about leading right now. So a lot of complexity, a lot of things happening. Everything's more challenging by the day, it feels. For those who are a university leader and trying to keep their headspace balanced on how to lead when there is an increasingly complex state policy environment, I'm just wondering if you have seen any particular behaviors where you're like, ooh, this kind of framing has really helped keep this system focused, or something perhaps you might give advice on that. But I'm just wondering if there is any recommendations for like, how do you lead in the midst of nonstop change?
Yeah, it really has been a period of nonstop change, and we've seen on the national level a lot of acrimony between different viewpoints, and I think we need more and more collaboration, and we need to create formal paths for this collaboration to take place between campus officials and state officials, so that they can better understand the plight of each body, any unintended consequences of potential policies that are coming down the pike, and what needs to be done next. One big movement that we have right now involves how does the campus experience tie into workforce outcomes? And this can really get blood pressure up on a lot of fronts, because people on campuses don't want to just be seen as the producer of widgets who are going to fill these workforce needs. But at the same time, people go to college to go get jobs and to have fulfilling lives. And that in turn increases tax bases and helps everyone all at the same time. And I think there's going to be a continued push to really talk about learning outcomes in the different forms of what is going to lead to jobs, what is going to lead to better communication skills, showing you can collaborate, that you can communicate, that you can lead, work with others. All those types of interpersonal skills are going to be critical, as well as very specific subject matter within programs. And I think the ability to translate that classroom experience into some of those outcomes will be paramount moving forward. And those programs of study and those institutions that are able to do so, I think, will be at a distinct advantage in these next couple of years.
First off, I think communicate. I think that actually is a great idea. That word, we should invent that.
Yeah.
Collaborate. Yeah, that's perfect.
When we talk about skills that graduates need, it's actually like, that is it. We're so grateful that you were able to spend this time with us. I realize that we're wrapping up, but I want to, one last question is the best advice that you've received that has helped you in your career. I'm just curious if there's anything that you would share with the crowd.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's don't take yourself too seriously. I'm a part of a process. I'm a part of a much bigger team and, set of actions that goes on in this country. If I were to quit or to fall over tomorrow, my job would be replaced in the next couple of weeks, and SHEEO would move forward. I'm very proud of what we do. I'm proud of the job I get to do. But when I go home at the end of the day, I realize all that it takes, and I'm just one little infinitesimal part of that larger conversation and set of processes. So I just try to not take myself too seriously, but understand what I do contribute.
That's a much more helpful. I'm always kind of like, hey, nobody here is an actual surgeon. Yeah. Nobody's actually going to, I know we're doctors, but we're not the kind of doctors that people need. So let's just but I think that's a much more healthy way of framing it. So, well, Rob, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciated the chance to kind of learn from you and think differently about the challenges of the day from the lens and the altitude of the system world. And you coordinating all of the system heads together is a super valuable it's a service offering that the country really needs. So thanks for doing that. Sarah, as always, thanks for being an excellent co-host.
It's been a pleasure. And Rob, wonderful to see you again.
You as well. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. See you later.
Bye.